What is going on? This is Sam Knopf, Sam Fit, checking in with you guys. I guess you're all doing terrific, and we are back with another video. So I uploaded a video a few weeks back talking about taking you guys through my full leg day routine, and I said if you guys want me to do a video to cover my other leg day routine, I will do that for you, and that's what we're doing today. So the previous video covered my quad dominant day, including some hamstrings. So this is going to be covering my hamstring dominant day, including some quads, also including a few other movements I've been adding to my routine in the last 6 months. That's been paying a lot of dividend. I think a lot of people are neglecting that you should definitely be prioritizing if you want to limit the amount of injury that you are getting, and actually at the same time, improve the kind of stimulus that you are getting. That's what we are going to be covering today. So why is hamstring important? I mean, duh, if you're training legs, hamstring should be important, quad should be important, they are important. But one particular point that I like about hamstring is, if you care about competing or bodybuilding, like I will argue that if you have a well-developed hamstring, that will visually increase the shape and the size of your legs when you're standing on stage. You like that hamstring drop. It is just, undeniable when you see that, like, man, that's a massive leg, especially to the side. That hamstring drop, we all want that. We all chase after that. Of course, that is a superficial reason for reason why you should prioritize or focus on hamstrings, but also hamstrings is a stabilizer for your posterior chain. That's one of the many reasons why you should prioritize them, and hopefully you can watch this video and learn a thing or two, because I'm going to be covering a few tips that I'm doing, that I'm adding to my movement. One, not only to limit the amount of injuries that I possibly exposing myself to with the kind of training that I'm doing, but at the same time, obviously allow me to be a well-balanced individual as I go throughout my day-to-day life. Of course, you already know what we are going to be starting with. We are going to be starting with mobility, because if you care about training session, if you want to have a good training session, you need to make sure you are investing as much time in your mobility routine as much as possible. So you, one, prevent injury, and two, have a good training session. Of course, I already started sipping on that BPN Flight. Link in the description if you want to keep supporting your boy. Let that flow through the system while we get through this mobility and attack the first movement.
I just wanna have fun. Come and beat me up, meet me at the spot. Up all night till the sunrise. Pop back cool, get ready for the ride. Gonna feel good. Gonna feel good.
So mobility is done, and we are getting ready to start the first movement. The first movement is going to be standing leg curls. So I do have two variations of leg curls that I'm doing in my current training program. I am doing a seated leg curl, which is on my quad dominant day that you guys see in the previous video, and I'm doing standing leg curl. Regardless of, what your choices is, it doesn't really matter. I just like the variation. But at the end of the day, what we're focusing on, this is the shortening position or shortening part of the training. In case you don't know, you can only train your hamstrings in two variation or two spaces. The lengthened variation, which is going to include a lot of hip hinge movement, and the shortened variation, which is going to include a lot of seated leg curls, any type of something leg curl. Think about it. You're curling, you're shortening the hamstrings. When you're hinging, you're lengthening the hamstring. So we want to make sure at least you cover those two bases when you are training. So a shortening movements are like seated leg curls, lying leg curls, standing leg curls. I like to do them in a higher rep range, like 12 to 15, sometimes 15 to 20. So this one's going to be 12 to 15 repetitions, standing leg curls, 3 sets. Let's go.
I just wanna have fun. Come and beat me up, meet me at the spot. Up all night till the sunrise. Pop back cool, get ready for the ride.
So that is standing hamstring curls. Two tips I want to share with you guys. So when you're doing any sort of shortened movement or hamstring curls, two phrases I want you to think of when you're doing that. The first is a forceful concentric and slow eccentric. Forceful meaning the forceful concentric allows you to get a full contraction or forceful contraction on the concentric, and obviously on the eccentric part, when you're lowering the load, you milk that time under tension. So forceful concentric, slow eccentric. Also, another tip I want to share with you guys, it's the same tip that you can allow or you can use on when it comes to standing leg curls, you can apply to lying leg curls, is tucking your hips in, like internal rotation of the hips before you curl. So if you apply like internal rotation of the hips, what that does is automatically shortens the hamstring before you even start. So a lot of times if you just like swing in and you like, just more load, sometimes lighten the load a little bit and focus on your technique. And that technique should be, if you are on the seated leg curl, if you're on the lying leg curl, tuck your hips in, internal rotation of the hips. And once you internal rotate, you can feel your glutes already flexed, your hamstrings already flexed, then you curl. That alone will significantly add a gnarly pump to your hamstrings, and you probably realize you're just using way too much load and you're losing a lot of stimulus that you should be getting because you're ego lifting. All right, so now that we're done with the shortened position, we are moving to the lengthened position, and the movement we are going to be using is right here. This is the pit shark. And a lot of times when you see pit shark, it's being used as a non-axial loading, meaning obviously it's a bit like a belt squat. You're loading from the hips. You're not loading any sort of load on your back. It's a great movement if you want to add that to if you have an access to it. It's a great quad movement. But in this situation, I am using it solely for hamstring lengthened position. My hip hinge movement predominantly is going to be that. And the reason why I love this is because it gives me a little to no fatigue at all, because the load is pulling in the opposite direction as opposed to me holding onto it and lowering the bar without any sort of force. So essentially you have force pulling both ways from the constant tension that I'm getting from pulling it and lowering it at the same time. It keeps all that tension in your hamstrings. So if you have access to a pit shark, I highly recommend it. And I'm gonna be milking this for many mesocycles.
Get down in the car, one time give it all, bust it open hard, let me see you drop. Get down in the car, one time give it all, bust it open hard, let me see you drop.
In case you have a question, Sam, why are you only doing between 8 to 12 or 10 to 12? I've mentioned this in the past, in the previous videos, and essentially, any sort of hip hinge movement, you don't want to go anything more than 10 or 12. Oftentimes, the load or the stimulus will shift towards your lower back, and the longer or the more repetitions they typically have, the more you expose yourself to an injury. So when a client, for instance, can get more than 12 repetitions, I'll tell them add more loads so we can keep the reps down. Keeping the reps down, again, will add quality to the movement, right? I'd rather you increase the load, keep the reps down, then keep the loads light and chase high repetition, because again, it's a very tasking, cardiovascularly, if that's a word, tasking to the body alone. So the more gassed you are, the more potential you tend to expose yourself to injury. So I prefer my clients to do their reps between 10 to 12 repetitions, sometimes even 8, especially when it comes to things like like good morning, RDL, deadlift. There is no benefit, there is an opportunity cost or diminishing return anytime you go past 12 repetitions.
I fucked up this hustle, day we hustle, but then oh my.
Next movement on deck is something that you probably, if you don't follow me on Instagram, you probably haven't seen before, but if you follow me on Instagram, you know exactly what this is going to be. So it's going to be the Curtsy Lunge. So the Curtsy Lunge is essentially, I think a lot of people see Curtsy Lunge and like, that's a lot of girls doing that, but I'll tell you the reason why I'm doing a Curtsy Lunge. Curtsy Lunge is great. Curtsy lunges, it's great for glute quad improvement, but more so, I'm running as exposed my body in terms of like, my limitations. I've been adding a lot of single leg movement into my leg day routine. Single leg movement allows me to isolate each muscle group individually without a different muscle group compensating for each other. One thing I realized from running is my glute med is weak. Most of the times when you're doing RDLs, you're doing squats, your glute max typically takes the load of the effort. But the glute med is often neglected, and the glute med is an awesome stabilizer for your posterior chain. So when that is weak, other muscle group, just like any other thing, will tend to take majority of the work and overcompensate and lead to injury. So all my leg day movement has some form of single leg variation in them. So this is a Curtsy Lunge.
Oh my.
Give you a quick tutorial. So if you trying to add this to your routine, normally a Curtsy Lunge, nice and stable here. to the side and come back down. Body weight, no load, come back down. When you get efficient at this, you want to add more load, you grab a kettlebell and add a little more into it. Again, you should feel glute and hamstrings on fire. So that is one level. One level is just the curtsy without the load. You can add load on top of that. And so once you get proficient and you feel like that's not challenging enough, then you can add some sort of deficit to it. And again, just like without any load, you can start without using any load. Touch down, come back, touch down, come back. And to throw some sort of core component into it, sit down, elevate, touch, hold, touch. So of course, when you become proficient at that, which is what I'm gonna be doing, you add load to that component. So just like any other movement that you're doing, you can always progress it from easiest to hardest.
Let me see you try. I fucked up this Russell, baby, we hustle, what the
Oh my.
That's gonna be the conclusion of hamstring leg day focus. And again, before you ask, a lot of you guys might think, oh wow, that's not a lot of movement. So just a general overview on what my current training program is. My volume overall on legs is on a maintenance volume on quads and hamstrings. And the reason that being is because I'm still running. And of course, in order for me to manage fatigue, I need to make sure I decrease my running volume, my training volume on legs, still at the same spot where I want to maintain my strength. I want to maintain the size of my legs without jeopardizing my other goal that I want to focus on, which is running. So that's why most of my movements are just a handful of movement, quality, and I still get a great amount of stimulus from it. So in case you are out there, you're trying to figure out, okay, how to balance running or athleticism, obviously because most of what you do is running related, so you want to decrease your volume of what you do on the lower body so you can make sure you're not running yourself into the ground. So that is the movement. So we just finished with the single leg thrust. Again, priority being focusing on glute, maximizing, making sure we are strengthening each body part to make sure we don't have any sort of lagging body parts. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video, and if you have, give this video a thumbs up, share with your friends, be sure to copy some of these movements and apply that into your training program. Sam Fit, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.